Hello and welcome to My Favorite Games, a podcast for game designers and publishers to geek out about games they like to play. Today, I'm super excited to host Bryan Brammer. Residing along the East Coast in North Carolina, and aside from being a game publisher, Bryan holds the position of communication and facilitation guru at Tangerine Games, ensuring processes run smoothly, communication is on point, and connecting like-minded people through the power of tabletop gaming. Bryan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Excited to talk about games and design and all the stuff that kind of behind the scenes a little bit.
Oh my gosh, I'm specifically interested in your perspective as an indie publisher in terms of how you see the landscape, especially and how it's changed over the past kind of couple of years. But before we get into your background and Tangerine Games, the game that you've brought to the figurative desert island is Anno 1800. Tell me about it. What is it? and why do you love it so much?
So it's interesting. It actually was a video game first, which I have not played. So I haven't played the video game version of it. I didn't even know it was a video game. I'm a big Nintendo Switch guy, so I'm not on the PC much. So some of these other first-person shooters, I'm the guy in the corner jumping up and down, shooting myself. Like, that's how I play first-person shooters. I'm just not good at them. But Anno 1800, I can't remember how it was introduced to me. Maybe at a convention or something like that. So what I love about it so much was one, okay, so it's not like a Euro game, but I think we can all agree Euro games aren't the prettiest games. They're a lot of grids, a lot of beige, a lot of tan.
A lot of beige.
Yeah, exactly. So this kind of has that feel, even though it's not like it. But what I really enjoy, the one thing I like about the game is on your turn, you are allowed to basically there's a couple things you can do, but you have these little cubes that are essentially your workers, and there's like 5 different types of them. And so maybe like I think your green ones are like farmers, and then your red ones are more of like your laborers, and you got some merchants. So the prettier the color, I guess, the more powerful that worker is. And so on your turn, you will place these different. Yeah, subjective. For on your turn, you would actually place these on little tiles that you have on your player board that represent, maybe you produce glass, maybe it produces coal, maybe it produces wheat. So all these different things. And in order to add other tiles and like upgrade those tiles, so if you want to, I don't know, if you want to make like wine or something, you have to have a manufacturing tile of 2 other things, and so there's a ton of this comboing and engine building. And what I like about it is every time that you were to gain a new worker so you can do more things, or exchange 2 farmers for like, a nobleman or something, you actually have to grab a new contract. And so you start the game with a certain amount of contracts. The goal is to get rid of all those contracts. But in order to complete them, you have to get better workers. And every time you get additional workers, you get more contracts. So there's this constant tension where it's like, yes, I know I'm going to take 3 contracts, and the contracts give you points too, so they're not always a bad thing. But I'm going to take these extra contracts because I need these workers. But now it's like I feel like I went backwards for a little bit because I was getting rid of a bunch of them, and now I got a ton of them. So just knowing when to kind of knock out 3 or 4 contracts with like 1 or 2 moves or a few workers is like, it's super satisfying. You can also have these different ports that you can create for ships to then do some trading. And there's a lot of mitigation too when you get stuck. There's ways to kind of get outside of that. So it reminds me a lot of another game that I love is Castles of Burgundy. And so there's a lot of different options you can do on your turn. You don't get to do a ton on your turn, but there's a lot of options. And you can always kind of mitigate some of those things. There's always something that you can do. So there is always this progression. So yeah, it's a longer game. I would say if you're playing with like 3 other players, you guys know it very well, you're looking like an hour and 45 minutes. But with someone new, you're looking at 2.5 hours. But it's a fun 2.5 hours because as you're thinking through your turn, all the other players are doing the same thing. So it's not like you're waiting on someone else having analysis paralysis. You all have it at the same time. So there's not a lot of, you don't feel like you're waiting. So yeah, that's kind of like a brief overview.
I love how you start off by saying it's not a Euro game. And then you describe it and I'm like, kind of sounds like a Euro game.
I know. Well, it's
It's a bit of worker
I feel
placement
like,
going on. It's a bit of,
yeah. I guess maybe not in the traditional sense that I like the Euro games that I've played, but it's got some of that stuff in it. Because now some of these different mechanisms in games, they've become it's such a spectrum now. So it might be a Euro game, but it could be on this end of it. It could be on this end of it. So I don't even really know anymore. So I'm like, it does this and it does this. You call it what you want.
What about it rings true or gets you excited the most? Is it more on the theme, or is it because I mean when you're talking about when you were describing it just then, I was hearing a relatively equal emphasis placed on the excitement of these interesting mechanics and how well they fit with the theme. Do you normally seek out theme or mechanics in terms of ones that like games that like stick with you?
Theme is really what drives me to make one purchase over another if I feel the game is similar in mechanism. So how the theme is implemented is how I'm going to even if like let's say I like the theme of game B, but game A's mechanisms are slightly better. I'm probably still going to go with B just because to me a lot of games it's very difficult to implement theme. Some people say, "Oh, the theme in this game is alligators." I'm like, "Yeah, but if you can replace that theme with anything and the game feels the same, then it's not a theme, it's more of like a skin like you get for like Fortnite or something like that." So I do think the term theme has been used, I don't want to say incorrectly, but like there's more to it than just the art that you slap on it. Like if the mechanisms match what you're doing, to me that's more thematic. So for Anno 1800, I will say it's kind of both. The theme I've seen better themes, but this just works with more of that 1800s. Probably getting the century wrong, but like it just works and it makes me feel like I'm actually contributing to building up my industry and that type of stuff. So
Relevant, yeah.
it's relevant, so it works. Some themes are awesome, the mechanisms are awesome, but it's like this this could have been something different. Still a great game, but it still felt off. And so in an 1800 doesn't feel off.
And when you guys are looking at games, from a publisher's perspective, how do you think about like how do you go about considering games? Is there a consistent, I mean, if you look at Tangerine Games as games that are out, there does seem to be a bit of there's a nature theme, there's a certain level of complexity there. Is that what you look for, or do you consider all sorts of different types of games that you come across?
I would say we are originally when it started, when we incorporated, so it was like 2 years ago. It was nature. It's kind of like a big thing. And nature
Yeah.
games are eventually going to they won't go away, but they won't be as hot as currently they could be. So we have to obviously future proof ourselves. Um, and so yes, that's kind of what we look for. There's some flexibility in that, like where it's not just nature, but it could be like outdoors, which I guess is nature. But there are some things that are like we at one point looked at a game that was more of like an aqua, like a water park theme land kind of thing. And it's like, okay, that's man made, but it's got the water. People go outside and enjoy it. So there's some flexibility there. But yes, we do kind of look, we definitely look at the theme and how the mechanisms play into that. And so, like for our first title, Nestlings, like the goal is to feed your nestlings. Like as we were developing it, we kind of went away from that, trying to figure out a certain mechanism. It's like, well, the game is called Nestlings, so feeding your baby birds has got to be the important part. We just have to make it more exciting. But then we did acquire another game. My business partner Brandon, who does a lot of graphic design, photography, is just brilliant at it. He had done some on this certain game that was more of a racing game that we might get to, but it's not nature at all. But it was a game that we believe backers should have, and it hadn't fulfilled yet. It's been like 3 years. The original publisher, designer, just kind of it was just went through some hard times, and that has nothing to do with nature. So then we've actually had a lot of other designers that wanted to publish, but they're just like, this is way too hard. We don't feel like dealing with this. Here's my game. I just want some royalties. Here's all the art, and it's just like, my God. So we've been blessed with a lot of that, and that's nothing to do with nature. So like, you know what? Maybe there's another imprint that we could go, and it's like all these other games that we kind of like revive, or games that are low investment for us because we've been blessed with, we have the relationships and they just kind of gave us the IP and said, just spread this all over the world rather than just certain regions. Um, and so that wasn't something we planned on doing, but it just happened and we couldn't say no. So yeah.
Speaking of planning, how did this all start? Because usually the people that I talk with on here, they are designers, and so they come and if they are publishers because they designed a game, they launched it, it was reasonably successful, and they didn't hate all of the non-designing process enough to say, oh, actually, I could do this. And then they went from that to, let me try and publish someone else's game. What was the origin? Was that how Tangerine Games started? Like how did you all get into this 2 years ago?
Yes, this is an interesting story. So again, Brandon, my business partner, Brandon Omi, he's the designer of Nestlings. So he designed that game. And this is before he and I met. So summer of 2022, right? This is 2024. Okay. He had already kind of signed the game to a smaller, yeah, right. He'd already signed the game to a smaller, like French publisher. I just think that he was, and he has shared with me, so he wouldn't mind me sharing this. I think he wanted the game published and he just didn't know how to go about it. So kind of like leaped at the first opportunity. I think any game designer really would, honestly. And then things just kind of didn't develop the way he wanted them to. He felt like he had lost a lot of control. And let's be honest, like when designers sign a game, like you have to be willing to get rid of that control because you have no risk. When someone, when you sign a game over, you don't have the risk. You collect the royalties. There is no risk for you whatsoever. For the publisher, there is. And so you do lose control. But we tried to keep our designers involved as much as possible without them causing a bottleneck. Like if we have to move forward and they don't like something, it's like, well, we got to move forward. We need a decision. We needed your input 2 weeks ago, and that stuff has happened. But anyway, I digress. So things just weren't going well. And so I actually saw a Nestlings post on Instagram and I was like, oh, that looks like a very pretty game. I got nothing to do tomorrow. Let's go ahead and play test it. So I play tested with two others and Brand, the designer. And I've really liked it. And it looks nothing like it does today. We've done a lot of development to it. And so you just kind of talk, we just communicated. We found out that there's a lot of things that we have in common. Whether it's our beliefs on life, our beliefs on game design, how we function, all that kind of stuff. And we hit it off. And honestly, so that was maybe June to July. That following November of 2022, we created Tangerine Games. So like a very small amount of time. And it was a risk for us. But the Tangerine Games name came from, he did a lot of graphic design. He did a lot of Kickstarter pages that he would design, taking photographs, and he called it Tangerine Games. So let's just adopt your brand. He hadn't gotten it officially like incorporated, but let's just adopt that name because people know you, and let's make it our publishing company. Let's get Nestlings. Let's get the rights back to that. I've got some extra money, and when I say extra money, I mean selling other stuff and giving up some pleasantries to basically buy the rights back from Nestlings. And let's do this. We can do this. I know we can do it. And we didn't. I want to say we didn't think twice about it because if you think too much about it, you'll never do it.
You won't do it.
Sometimes you just got to do it. So we just did it. We started getting more of the art in. We started place testing a lot. I went to PAX U 2022, which was my second PAX, and just play tested all over the place. And by that time, in the summer of last year, 2023, we were doing a Kickstarter campaign. It raised just under $120,000 with about $2,000 in ad spend, which is not a lot of ad. I mean, you see some of these campaigns
that's amazing.
that hit like 400,000. They're spending about 25% of that in ad revenue. So it was our first campaign. We were super conservative with the money that we had because, well, we didn't have any. And so we're very pleased with all that. So it really it merged. And I think, Brandon loves the design. He loves components, and we have control over that if we're a publisher. As just a game designer, we wouldn't.
So I totally get okay, there's a game that we have, we're going to get this thing out there. That's that's one thing. But it's a bit of a different thing to say, you know what? We'd like to do it with someone else's baby now. Right?
Yeah.
And so I guess walk me through like how practically, like how does it work? How do you go from doing nestlings to say, you know what, actually let's try and publish someone else's game now. Like Peaks, for example, how did that process work in terms of connecting with the designer, deciding that was the kind of vibe or the kind of genre that you wanted to publish, continuing development? Walk me through all that.
Yeah. So once you kind of start, the board game industry, it's a lot smaller than you think it is. You might go to these cons and have tons of people, but as far as the players who create the games and hiring contractors, like it's one of those where like people know people. And so when you start posting about certain things, designers will be like, I want to create a game. Oh, here's a new publisher. I like what they did. Let's send them a sell sheet. So you'd be surprised at how many sell sheets we got, being a small company that not a lot of people have heard of, because people want their games designed. So like they'll go over the internet and try to find something like, oh, a nature game. Let me submit this. Or then we actually started going to different sites and trying to find some sell sheets. So it really was more just curiosity than anything. Like, hey, what are some other games out there that we could possibly do? Because we just weren't sure. Did we want to do other designers, or did we just want to kind of do our in-house stuff? And it kind of depends. Some designs are much further along than others. Peaks, as you had mentioned, that just kickstarted or just completed in June of this past year. Did really well. That was a sell sheet that Brandon brought to me. I'm not sure if he found it or if it was sent to him, along with another one. We actually had signed two from that batch of sell sheets. One we've had to kind of move away from. The game was great. It's just designing is very fluid, and we were just not able to find a spot for it. And it's not fair to hold on to that game if we feel another publisher could do it. So that kind of sucks. But yeah, with Peaks, Sam Gray, he's from the UK. What really impressed us about that game was he had pitched it to a bigger publisher that said, this is great, but we don't feel like there's enough of a hook to designate it from some of our other titles. We thought there was two awesome hooks in it. One, we create these little flag minis, which turned out awesome. And this tag along mechanic where when it's not your turn, you can choose to tag along on another player's climb. You don't get as many benefits. You still have to use your stamina, but there's no downtime in between turns, which we really, really love. Like our games, we want them to be very, very interactive. But Sam had sent us get this, a 30-page, that's minimum, 30-page deep dive into everything that he had tested in the game, what's worked, what hasn't worked, so much so that like I did read it and I was bringing up stuff. He's like, oh yes, I addressed that on page 28. I'm like, oh, I missed that. So, I mean, he had thought of everything. And so this is one designer that we decided to actually have fairly involved in the entire process, which is usually not what you do because too many chefs in the kitchen, that kind of thing. But he was so passionate about his game. He has been awesome to work with. And the game was far enough along where just like, this could be a title that we definitely could publish, and we wouldn't be biting off more than we could chew because of how far along in development it was. So it was just a lot of playtesting and tweaks. It was not supposed to be our second game that we launched. It was going to be probably our third. Another one needed a lot more development. And so we did bite off more than we could chew in regard to all the components that go to the game. And it's completely different from Nestlings. There's a lot more probability and stuff. And so we had to lean on Sam. And I feel like, as I say, humble, bragging about being humble, if that works. I feel like we were humble enough to like, Sam, we really need your help. Yeah, we need to, hashtag bless. We need to, we definitely need to lean on him for a lot of this stuff. And that was very positive. But it was a big undertaking for our second title, and it's involving another individual that is depending upon us to make their game and for him to make money. Like that's a lot of pressure.
You said that working with Sam and Peaks, like that was a very almost oven ready type game. When you're looking at other games, you mentioned there was another game that you guys had signed that maybe needed a lot more work, and it was a bit too much for where you were in the process. When you're considering like putting your publisher hat on, let's just say if someone's out there that wants to pitch Tangerine Games, what are the benefits and drawbacks of having a game farther along or not as far along from the publisher's perspective? Do you want fully baked games, or do you or actually, if the game works but actually there's enough room for you guys to come in and develop it further in other ways, like, is that better? Does that make sense?
I think as a whole, people want games that are much further along, so that publishers can spend more of the time perfecting the narrative, arts, graphic design, marketing, getting rid of those broken bits that happen in games when you're testing. Like, oh man, if someone were to find out this strategy, game over. Play testing. Like, it's tough because sometimes it's not always easy to find a play tester, but like, you want people to break your game. You do. You want them to break it. And so a lot of times with a game that's been in the oven longer, they have also kind of tested a lot of the broken bits and addressed them. So ideally, yes, but at the same time, anybody out there who's aspiring to kind of be an indie publisher or something like that, I don't want you to think there's like a right or wrong way to approach this. Like, there isn't like a magic formula. And so there are certain games that we don't mind that aren't that far along because, one, they're not as intensive. So it's more of like a lighter game that you can play over and over again, like a trick-taking game. Or, I mean, you think of like Azul. I don't know how much time that was in the oven, but when you look at it, you're just like, this is pretty simplistic. It's very abstract. That's a game that if it was pitched to us, we definitely wouldn't have had a problem of putting more ingredients in it, putting it in the oven longer, and help bake. So those types of games is actually kind of exciting because then we're not just publisher, we're still kind of involved in the design and the development. So it's like it scratches that itch of that designer that we sometimes don't get to do as much of because we're busy working on everything else. So it's kind of good to have some of those games so you can kind of take the step outside of being a publisher for a little bit and be a designer again. So yeah, it's I would say ideally we want the game to be further along, and then if there's something like, hey, we're not sure about this part of it, how about you try to correct this, and this, and they take it back to like their playtesting team or whatever, and then we see if they're not only capable of changing it, but willing to change it, because that's a big thing when you sign someone. I've heard it say that designers can be divas. Brandon's a designer.
No.
I think he's a diva. No, I'm just kidding. They're very passionate about their project, so you don't want to dismiss that at all. But they also don't understand the publishing side of it, where it's like, it's deadlines, it's what's going to sell, that kind of stuff. And so a lot of times that's a good way to test the designer to see if they're willing to go back and change some things and figure out, do you want this game published or do you want it 100% your way and you're not budging? And I think a lot of people want it 100% their way, which again is fine, which is why they end up trying to go and publish it themselves. And then realize, there's a lot more involved here that I don't like doing than I anticipated.
I'd love to get on to that point in a moment, but when thinking about all the sell sheets that are sent to you, right, or searching for ones, I know that you were saying, Sam's with Peaks, you mentioned it was relatively far along, and there were a couple of hooks that you could see in the game. Plus, it maybe fit a little bit more with this kind of nature, concept that if you guys were going to be theming or niching in any other way, it felt like a natural fit. When you see sell sheets as a publisher, are there common things? Are there common things like that, like being very clear about hooks, indicating why something might be different or might resonate from a marketing perspective? Are things like that important for you to see? And B, what are the things that you see again and again that you're like, please stop doing that? Like, that's not helpful. I don't want to see that. Like that. Yeah, that is it's not. What is it? The Princess Bride. you keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. You know. So yeah. What advice would you give about what to do, and also what not to do when someone is trying to pitch you their game?
We will look at any sell sheet. Obviously, some look better than others because some game designers are also like really good with iconography, you know. And so I don't want to discourage anyone who has a game idea. Like there's plenty of places on Facebook where you can submit your sell sheet and people will give you opinions. Now, I will say there are some Facebook groups, and I will be bold to say this, and I've interacted with some of them. I feel like there are some when you put your sell sheet out there, people will rip it to shreds, and that's not helpful. And those people should probably get second and third hobbies. Honestly, like I'm not trying to knock them at all, but it's like let's get outside of yourself for a little bit. And so for anybody who has shown their sell sheet on a Facebook group or something like that, and it's gotten destroyed, listen to some of what they're saying. Ignore the tone and the arrogance. It's very easy to get upset or feel like, oh man, I'm not fit for this business because I don't, yeah, I'm useless or I don't act as tough or as I know as much as this guy. I'll be completely honest with you. When they're having to bark and they're addressing you aggressively, they don't know as much as they're making you think they know. You fake it till you make it. So I don't want people to get discouraged because I've had interactions. I'm like, yeah, so that's some constructive criticism, but could you try doing that without sounding like a jerk? And then they don't like that kind of thing. So you create the best sell sheet that you can and send it. Like just, I mean, as you know, with podcasts, like when you first starting, it's like you may not have the best audio, not you particularly, but or the best video, but content is king. Focus on that content. And so that's just an encouragement to people. Send your sell sheets, even if that publisher is like, this looks good. I said, but I want a little more. And then you go back and you redo it. They're not saying no to you. They're not saying no really even to the game. They're saying no to the sell sheet. And so there definitely is some advice to have there. So that's kind of like that's like a soapbox issue there. But for us, if we see a sell sheet that we don't feel like is as good as others that we've seen, and we're interested in the title because of either the theme or it's like that one cool thing that we see, I'm like, that looks pretty cool. We usually contact them. Now we're a smaller publisher, so we don't have sell sheets coming in all the time, like a Stonemeyer would or AEG or Ivy Studios or something like that. We don't have all of that. So we do have more flexibility to reach out to these individuals and say, can we play on TTS? Could you explain this further? And if we play the game and it's like, man, this is awesome. We would like to see this. I don't care what the sell sheet looks like, honestly, at that point. We're all just trying to submit our passions to get published, you know? And so, yeah, so all that to say, you still kind of look at other people's sell sheets and copy them. It's okay. It's okay to copy. Like there's no like, no one's copywriting a sell sheet. But what we like to see is probably like the length of the play. The one thing that focus on one thing that's unique that you don't think other games have. Now it's gonna be tough because there's nothing new under the sun. Like when people say, "Oh, do we have an original mechanisms with custom this or that?" and then you don't tell me about that, more than likely it's not original because you're using those buzzwords to say something that you can't convey because it's not actually true. So that might just be because you're struggling with some of the terminology to use in your spell sheet, but the publishers do see right through that. If you use those buzzwords but you don't explain it, their assumption is it's really not as fantastic as they think it is. And not to be mean, but it's just like when you're close to something, you think it's great, but everybody else also has to think it's great because it's a business. And so I would, what I've kind of stayed away from is, words like, custom this, because we're the publisher. It might not be custom for us to do because we're going to be the ones putting the money into it. It's got this original mechanism or original, like, explain to me what it is and allow me to determine if it's original. And not just me, Bryan, but like us as a publisher. Allow us to make that assessment. And if we feel like there is something there, we will then just kind of approach them and say, let's flesh this out a little more. So I don't care really about the lore of your game. I don't care about the flavor text. That's cool and everything. And we'll incorporate it as best we can in the rulebook. But does the game play well? So we want to see mechanisms. We want to see just certain things that is it gonna pop out immediately without you having to give a sell sheet to everybody who wants to buy it.
Important to have either video playthrough or tabletop simulator ready to go.
I hate tabletop simulator with a
Yeah.
roaring passion.
Yeah, I do too. I don't like
But
it.
it's but but it's necessary in this business, especially when a lot of these publishers are remote and they're all over the world.
Yeah.
So it is helpful if you do have a TTS a mod. You're going to increase your chances. Honestly, I might even just be like, oh, this is a sell sheet. It wasn't the best, but let's play the game. So you're going to get me to look at it if your sell sheet isn't on par. So it's almost like I don't want to say a backup, but all the weight isn't in the sell sheet. If you have a simple sell sheet, that's not awesome, but you have a video, I'll look at your game, even if I'm not originally interested, because I just like games. Even if we might not publish it, I can say, hey, this is what we liked. This is what we didn't like. We're not interested in playing it because it just doesn't fit with our company. I said, but here are some other publishers that could. Like we have a game that it's going to be like more of a tile trick taking game that we signed and based off of Nestlings IP. So we're kind of putting our original IP on that. So it's going to be kind of cool. And this designer also has another game that he pitched to us. Like I love, but Brandon and I have to be on the same page, and I haven't heard much from him about it. But I was like, hey, I said, this is what you can do. Here's your sell sheet. He sent me a video. I'm like, he's like, people are asking for me to cut the video down by 2 minutes. I was like, if that's what you're asking, then do it. If that's what a publisher is asking. But I'm like, hey, send this to this publisher or this publisher because they publish games similar to the theme that you have. So I am always wanting to give advice like that, even if we have no desire in taking it. I want them to at least come away with something from our interaction.
So getting back to kind of Kickstarter, why should a designer who is developing their game, they're thinking about how to go forward, do they try and pitch it to some big publisher? Do they launch their own Kickstarter, or do they try and seek out folks like you in terms of you understand how best the Kickstarter world works, and you're a publisher, but you're also you're small, so that means there's a lot more interaction. Why should designers think about pitching a publisher versus trying to do a Kickstarter or launch it on their own?
Depending upon the size of your publisher, like they use Kickstarter for different reasons. You look at Simon and a couple others, like it's a pre-order system for them, which again, go where your customers are. I'm not going to sit here like, oh, Kickstarter was originally for people to kickstart. That's great. That's what it originally was, but it's not that anymore, and we have to accept that. People use it for even Garphill Games does it. With Raiders of the North Sea, all the shim stuff. He'll put a game out there. It's only a 15-day campaign. The game's already made. It's just being used as a pre-order system, which I don't have a problem with that. But it does actually kind of hurt publishers like me because it kind of overfloods that platform. But either way, I would say if you don't want to publish or pitch your game, and you actually want to make it more of like, I want to print 500 copies just because I want this to be out in the wild, because this is my passion project. I've got some available money sitting around. Go for it. Go for it. But I do want to caution, when you do go for it, you're probably going to end up doing a lot of stuff that you don't like. You love your game, you love seeing the art, you love seeing it come together. I said, but you're talking about VAT tax. You're talking about fulfillment centers. You're talking about freight. You only have 500 games.
Suez Canal.
Suez Canal. Yes. The fact that your games are going to take 4 or 5 months to get to their destination because they have to, have a detour. Manufacturing costs when you print a lower quantity. You're gonna, the difference between printing 1,000 copies and 2,000, that's a big difference there. Now, once you start getting to 3 to 4 to 5, the increments, they get smaller, but it still is a big difference. I'd say up to 5,000. And so I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but if it's a passion project for you and you just want to see something come about, I would even just say limit your sales to the U.S. If you're in the U.S. If you're in the UK, maybe limit your sales in the UK, which could be tough because Kickstarter, I think, is an American platform. I'd say what's weird with Peaks, actually, the US orders and Europe about the same. I was surprised. Usually
Yeah, Europe
it's
is
more.
massive. Yeah,
It
massive
is,
market.
but I think also because the designer was in the UK and it was mountains that were featured from all different continents, which was a huge thing. So again, even the theme of your game is going to determine which countries it does well in. But yeah, if it's a passion project, yeah, I think Kickstarter is a good thing. It allows you to kind of not go in the negative, but do take this into consideration. You have to kind of look at art and the Kickstarter page, graphic design as sunk costs. You really don't set your funding goal with it in mind to get that money back. Your funding goal is to make sure that the backers get their product. So that I think some people make that mistake where they put that goal super high because it's like, yes, I need to print this many copies at this cost per copy, and then I also want all that money back that I spent on the art and stuff. So I'm going to put my goal higher. And it's like the goal is getting the game to backers. Like it's called Kickstarter. They're making your product come alive, and it kind of sucks, but you kind of work for them a little bit. Like there's that built-in entitlement that is warranted to a certain degree. We actually did have a backer. No, I'm getting off track, but we had a backer that I actually had to give a refund back and just kick off our platform campaign because he was being negative. And I was like, I don't need your sale. We have a great community. I don't need your sale, you know? But to a certain extent, like the backers, like they're first. They create this for you. So I wouldn't say it's a bad idea. It's definitely, if you want your game to have a lot of sales and get out there, then I would pitch it. If it's just a passion project and it's limited in scope, do it yourself. But do understand this part. Just like with book publishing, if you self-publish this game, it's going to be hard for another publisher to come alongside and pick it up and make more copies because it's already been established and broken the market with your self-publishing name. So like I self-published a children's book. If I ever get that picked up by somebody else, they probably will not pick up the first book. I have to probably create a second first book in the series. It's just bigger publishers are like, no, this needs to be our original idea. So that is something to keep in mind that if you're like, I want to launch this, hoping a publisher will see it and then pick it up, they might want to do distribution, but you still have to pay for the production of the copies. So just keep that in mind that you kind of are shooting yourself in the foot a little bit if you go to Kickstarter and you're hoping someone picks it up. The chances of that is slim. So I'm not sure how helpful
Interesting.
that is.
So that's a little different than what some other folks say sometimes in terms of the getting on the radar of some publishers. I imagine it is primarily from a distribution perspective, but some people say, especially if it's your first game, launching it on Kickstarter, having a successful Kickstarter, even if it's not wildly successful, at least establishes that you can do something that people like enough. Maybe the game is interesting enough that someone might want to pick it up. So yeah, it's interesting to hear the other side of that.
Well, and I what was the game? First in Flight by Artana Publishing, I think. Awesome game about when we first were flying the Wright brothers and stuff like that. It got picked up by Genius Games, who does all of this educational games like cytoplasm or all those different things about the cells and awesome worker placement games. They actually picked that up and they published it. So there are one-offs like that for sure, but that game was pretty successful. So it was easy to just be like, hey, can we you handle the Kickstarter and now we're going to take it from there for reprints. But again, like when you go to Kickstarter and you don't have a lot of money to invest in certain things, it's a smaller print run, you're basically creating a bunch of prototypes and then you might be sending those out. So, and then the next print run might look drastically different than the game that you created. So I wouldn't say that's been my experience, but I have seen other games been picked up. But usually, again, from my perspective, it's distribution. A publisher is going to want to they're going to want a bigger cut of the pie. And if you've already kickstarted the game, more than likely, if they do some distribution and that type of stuff, they're going to make less. So it's not that it's impossible, but I think you will have a better shot at pitching than putting all that towards a small campaign, hoping someone will pick it up. So if we're comparing it that way, I am okay to be 100% wrong. If that changes, I know, but it's just been in my circle and the experience that I've talked to about people. That's what I've heard. It doesn't mean that I'm 100% right. So
of course. So you guys had a super successful first launch with Nestlings. Peaks has done incredibly well on Kickstarter as well. What's next? I know that you were, I was lurking around some of your Kickstarter comments, and you were showcasing some, I guess it must have been like a playtest version or prototype version of something that you guys are working on. But like anything you can share about what you guys are working on now?
I can. We're working on. We got several irons in the fire. Kind of have to, right? And so this is a game that is I don't want to say code name, so it's not like a new video game console everybody's talking about.
No, it is a code name.
It is
Everyone
a code name.
needs to remember it. Yeah,
it's called Hearthland. So like heart, but like th. So Hearthland, because you think about a hearth inside a home is like the basic area that everybody hangs around. Usually it's a fireplace. And so originally it was going to be it's a puzzly type exploration game. It's custom, it's original. No, just mocking my other comments. But one thing that's what the sell sheet says exactly. If that's what it says, it's true. And so you are basically these woodland creatures, and you're exploring this area. And originally it was just you knew which resources you were going after, but we've actually kind of changed it to where we flipped all those over, and so you can choose as you go on your path to flip them over. So do you want to press your luck and move forward and flip more over to see, or do you want to kind of keep those a mystery and not let other players have an advantage? So there's that exploration part that's really neat. But then you'll take these resources and you'll place them in your own player board, or what we were calling was a den. And the way that you place them, you get certain points, certain weather tokens, change the scoring of those different resources. There's some area majority into the game. There's private goals. It's super fun. Play super quick. Well, I say super quick, like 40 minutes for a 4-player game. But what we realized was, man, there's a lot of games with anthropomorphic animals and that are in the forest. And I think it's a theme that's been overdone. And so this is when we go back to that conversation of theme. We have completely revamped the game. So the name we're going to go with, firsthand here for everybody is Kaleidoscope. Okay, Kaleidoscope. And so it's almost as if these creatures are living in a world that is kind of like inside a kaleidoscope. So you understand the sharp angles, the beautiful colors of what a kaleidoscope does. A lot of colors. Instead of experiencing or collecting resources, they're recording experiences that they've seen. Whether it was an awesome sunset or a destructive thunderstorm. So they're kind of logging all these things in their journey. So they're explorers themselves. So we're getting a lot of the graphic design and the art done. It's going to look a lot different than some of our other titles, but we're shooting for a Kickstarter launch in February, March, maybe April. It really kind of depends on Peaks. We want to make sure that we give Peaks enough attention and don't cannibalize that type of stuff. It's a game we're really excited about. It was another one of those that was about 80 to 85% complete, and through playtesting, we're like, hey, let's do this is better. Let's try this. And so the designer has been awesome. He has been incredible. He's been very involved, but he also understands, like, when we're saying, hey, we're good, we're moving forward now, he's like, okay, it's good to have those conversations. We played the game with him at Gen Con, so it was awesome to kind of meet him in person finally. So we're super excited about that game. That's one that we really want to, as soon as the Kickstarter's over, open the pledge manager and like in a month hit print. So we're definitely getting ahead in that regard. Where Peaks, we actually had to fire our original artist because of some ethical issues that we didn't hold to be true, and so we had to start over on that project. about $5,000 down the hole.
Wow.
And so just so that backers know, like, it's not your money, it's money that we made from Nestlings after fulfillment, and that's what we wasted. So yeah, we're super excited about that title. We really feel like that's going to hopefully put Tangerine Games more on the map. Because once we have 3 games, we can hopefully start putting together more like a catalog to send to English distributors. Because it is tough with distributors. They're not really going to work with a single, like a small indie publisher that only has 1 game because we just don't have the volume. So it's like, oh, if we could order 3,000 copies of each of your game, that's 9,000 copies. That makes sense for us as opposed to just 2,000. So we feel like this is going to be a game that's really going to put us on the map.
Nice. Awesome. Well, Bryan, thank you so much for taking some time to share your experience, especially from the publishing side, to geek out a little bit about Anno 1800. And just have an overall kind of great chat. If anyone out there would like to find out more about Peaks or other games from Tangerine Games, you can find them on Instagram at instagram.com/tangerine.games or on Facebook at facebook.com/tangerine-games, no dot, or on their website at tangerine.games.
It's a little confusing.
No, it's good. It's good. Peaks is still available for late pledges, which you can find a link to in the description below, along with all the other games that they're developing. Bryan, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey man, thanks for having me, but I appreciate it.